On this edition of the Correspondents, North Korea says it's ready to launch a preemptive strike against the United States if the U.S. shows any signs of what Pyongyang calls reckless aggression. Russia, Syria, and Iran issue strong warnings to the United States against launching new airstrikes on Syria. And more than 20 million people at risk of famine in Somalia, Yemen, and Nigeria, in a tragedy already affecting 100,000 people in war-torn South Sudan. And welcome to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Up first, tensions running high in the Korean Peninsula as we go to air. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe warning that North Korea may be capable of firing a missile loaded with sarin nerve gas towards Japan. International concern obviously growing that a missile or nuclear test by the authoritarian state may be imminent. U.S. President Donald Trump at a news conference this week with visiting NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said he spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping about efforts to stop North Korea from further developing nuclear weapons. Here's what he said.
I think he wants to help us with North Korea. We talk trade, we talk a lot of things, and I said the way you're going to make a good trade deal is to help us with North Korea. Otherwise, we're just going to go it alone. That'll be all right, too. But going it alone means going it with lots of other nations.
And early Friday morning, a North Korean official responded by adding more fuel to the fire, saying the U.S. is far more vicious and more aggressive under the current president and that Pyongyang is prepared to launch a preemptive strike on its own. Now, to bring us up to date on the escalating threats, we are joined in Washington by the host of VOA's Asia in a Minute, Steve Miller, along with international broadcaster Eun Cho with VOA's Korea service. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us. I know things are moving very quickly, but Steve Miller, I just want to get your take on this latest back and forth. Is this a dangerous escalation of words, or what are we seeing just more of the same kind of bluster we've heard out of Pyongyang?
Well, I think you need to take a look at both, really. It's a lot of the same escalation on North Korea's part, the same rhetoric we hear year after year after year, and also in some of the rhetoric we hear from the international community. The change is President Trump tweeting and some of his comments. But if you talk to those in South Korea, they're still going to Yeouido Park to look at the cherry blossoms. They're still enjoying Jajangmyeon on Friday, April 14th, Black Day there. And according to tour websites, you can still go to Panmunjom and the joint security area as a civilian tourist right inside the DMZ.
So we're looking at pictures of the DMZ the last time you visited there.
Right, that was from a few years ago, but it's a huge tourist area. And as a civilian, you can go there, and Saturday, April 15th, tours are still operating.
What was it like for you when you visited the demilitarized zone?
It was a very surreal experience. I've been a total of 4 times, and the very first time I went, that's when the North Korean guards came out, went right up to the cement line on the demarcation line and stood guard.
Hey, you tall American guy, get back.
No direct communication with them.
I see.
But it was a very surreal experience, and you know, the UN and the U.S. and the ROK forces there are very particular in what you can and cannot do.
I'm curious about the North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister's statements, Han. Are these words cause for concern? What is the level of anxiety right now in Seoul as a result of this back and forth that we're hearing?
There has been an escalation of tensions all throughout the week, and I talked to a lot of Koreans throughout this week, and many of them said that they're not really worried because North Korea's saber rattling and South Korea and America's wartime readiness, that's been there for 70 years.
They're
so there's
used to
really
this,
nothing
aren't they?
new about this, yes.
They're used to this, but what about this Minister Han saying these words? Is he saying anything new?
Well, I haven't seen such a level of rise of tensions in previous years, and even Minister Han, but also from a North Korean military statement is also notable. North Korean military says that it is ready to preemptively strike South Korea, and coming from military, that that's important message coming out there.
It's a warning, right, Steve?
Well, it is a bit of a warning, and that is probably one of the little bit of a change we've seen this time is that they're saying they're willing to strike the United States, which they've said in the past, but the preemptive piece of that is a little bit different this time. We've also seen 2 editorials and 2 articles in Chinese newspaper this past week explicitly telling North Korea to either halt their programs or step back. And the China Daily said for North Korea not to do anything reckless either. And in the People's Daily, it made a suggestion that if North Korea were to perhaps suspend its weapons programs, China would take a more active role in protecting North Korea.
So there's a carrot that's being dangled right now.
Well, I think it's a sign because, as I said before, the unknown factor here is what President Trump may do if there is a missile launch or if there is a nuclear detonation.
Right. It's interesting that China is now getting involved as sort of as a peacemaker, something that Donald Trump said, if they're not prepared to do that, take a more active role, we're going to take a more active role. What role should China be playing in this entire dispute?
Well, China, international community is looking to China to step up its pressure against North Korea and enforce strict UN sanctions against North Korea. China is North Korea's biggest trading partner. All the economy, the money is flowing into North Korea through China. So everybody's looking at China to take those sanctions.
So South Korea wants China to take a lot more active role in what is going on right there for the safety of South Korea.
And not just South Korea. The international community needs China to take a more active role. That's one of the things that analysts have told me is that there can be no solution on North Korea without China being a part of it.
To both of you, what about these reports from the Japanese intelligence that some of the missiles that Pyongyang is capable of launching perhaps may contain, may be tipped with a sarin nerve agent? Again, is that a big concern for the population of South Korea?
I read the South Korean media, and what they're concerned is not about the sarin gas that North Korea may launch against South Korea. What they're concerned about is the hype of concern from the Japanese side, from the Japanese government and the politicians, that they're thinking that Japan is too much worried about North Korea and that there may be some other ulterior motives that Japan is doing all this.
Steve Miller, I'm wondering, how is this impacting the South Korean elections?
Well, we've seen both candidates slightly change their viewpoints on the THAAD missile defense system, the Terminal High Altitude Defense System. Both candidates were initially very much opposed to that or looking at revisiting that when they came on the scene. But as Kim Jong-un continues to ratchet up tensions, they've both turned around saying, maybe we need to keep this here. In fact, Ahn Cheol-soo, who is the second candidate right now, in second place, he initially was very much against THAAD being deployed on the peninsula, but has since come out and said, hey, we need to honor the agreements made under the previous administration, so now he's backing the THAAD deployment.
What is the South Korean electorate looking for in their leaders right now? Is the trend sort of leaning a little bit towards more to the right now?
Oh yeah. I mean, if there's a rise of tensions, people will vote for more conservative candidates. Those who are more stern against North Korea, people will vote for that person. And already the candidates are skewed to the right side already, what they're saying and their remarks and policies.
Right, and they are very much viewed as once very liberal, very progressive candidates, but they need that conservative base to get elected, and they've been slowly changing their policies going after that voting bloc.
Right, because right now there aren't really leading conservative candidates right now, so the liberals are skewing to the conservative side to get those conservative votes.
So as a result, we're seeing a tightening up of the race.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, Moon Jae-in has about a 40% approval rating or in the polls, and then Ahn Cheol-soo has 37%. And according to the latest, those are the two leading candidates.
So now they're almost neck and neck.
Oh yeah.
I'm wondering, in the amount of time that we have, what is the level of trust for President Donald Trump? Do South Koreans trust that he will do the right thing?
Actually, they do. I read the South Korean news reports and the editorials, and what they view is that President Trump is a ultimate deal maker, and that he has this grand plan against North Korea, and that he's on an offensive against North Korea under his strategies and plans. We shall see. Steve Miller, thank you so much, because I get a lot of my updates on Asia from your VOA 60 reports, so thank you so much for that. And thank you, Eunjung. We have, it's time right now for a short break, but when we come back, souring relations between Russia and the United States and what that might mean for the people of Syria. You're watching The Correspondents on Voice of America. Thank you, guys. I wish I had more time.
news, and notes. This is Living Better.
How do children learn to talk as they grow? That's what South Australian educators want to discover. So they installed listening devices in hundreds of homes, like the Dorian family home in Adelaide. Tina Dorian says the monitoring has helped her learn about her son Isaac's speech progression.
Isaac was quite slow to start talking, start using words, but we found that it was because of Lachlan talking for him.
The listening devices filter out background noise, highlighting conversations between parents and children, says researcher Katerina Iluthuru.
It's not who parents are, it's what they do with their children. So it could be simple activities like reading to their children, singing to their children, walking around the home.
When the children in this study start school, the researchers may learn more about the long-term educational impact of early language habits. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
VOA, telling America's story for more than 70 years.
The voice speaking of America and the war.
VOA exports America's most powerful product, freedom of speech.
Close the waters.
In parts of the world, information is scarce and oppression real. VOA, sharing a voice that says, we report the truth.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. We move now to the deteriorating relations between the United States and Russia. Several hours of meeting in Moscow Wednesday between U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov seemed only to reinforce existing divisions between the two nations. Secretary Tillerson came away from that meeting at the Kremlin with a gloomy assessment moving forward.
The current state of U.S.-Russia relations is at a low point. There is a low level of trust between our two countries. The world's two foremost nuclear powers cannot have this kind of relationship.
So where do both countries go from here? Joining us now to talk about that, we welcome VOA Moscow correspondent Daniel Sheriff on Skype. Hello, Daniel. Along with VOA diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain right here in Washington. I thank you both for joining us. Daniel Sheriff, I'm going to start with you. You heard Secretary Tillerson. Does Moscow agree with his assessment?
Yeah, unfortunately, both sides were very clear that relations are not going so well, that they are more or less at a low point. And of course, we heard President Donald Trump say that repeat that similar feeling as well. So unfortunately, we don't see things really going forward or going the direction that the Kremlin was hoping when it saw Donald Trump become elected. Of course, during his campaign, he had very positive things to say about trying to improve U.S.-Russia relations and about President Vladimir Putin in particular. This is definitely not what they expected, correct, Daniel? They expected a more Russia-friendly candidate in Trump. Very much so. They expected there to be a very big change in relations when they saw the comments that he was making during his campaign. And of course, they were hoping that at least some of those would come true after he took office. They were hoping particularly on the issue of Syria that we'd see some level of cooperation between Russia and the United States in fighting against Islamic State terrorists. But as we saw from the U.S. airstrike last week, and the quick deterioration, comments coming from both sides, very harsh words about wanting to see President Bashar al-Assad of Syria removed from power, wanting Russia's support in that regard, and Russia essentially responding, saying that it's up to the Syrian people, and that's their normal line, essentially, that they don't want to see a vacuum of power develop inside of Syria. It's a big turn of events, Cindy. So how badly, I'm wondering from your point of view, has a missile strike, the U.S. missile strike at the Al-Sharat airfield in Syria, damaged relations between these two countries?
Well, I think it certainly has complicated matters. And some had thought that, because President Trump had been so complimentary of Russian President Putin, that there might possibly be some kind of big deal and that the U.S. might lift sanctions against Russia. None of that is happening, we're seeing now, especially after this airstrike. I mean, it seemed to me that the reaction from Moscow was certainly not pleased, but not really all-out red-hot alert anger. It was something in between. And I would say that this meeting also showed that both sides were saying we're trying to understand each other's positions. I think the Russians were trying to understand exactly what the U.S. position is now. Is it regime change?
Right.
Or is it just this was a strike, but not that much damage was actually done? So I think there's Russia's not used to the U.S. being the unpredictable one.
Right. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that a bit later. But I want you to wear your political pundit's hat right now. There are some in the Democratic camp who see this this strike as more as a cynical distraction to take away focus from the congressional Russia probe. What are they saying on Capitol Hill? What are you hearing from lawmakers?
Well, I am hearing some of that, and some of them saying that, you know, it's not the first time that a U.S. president or other leaders around the world, when they are getting very unpopular at home and have all sorts of problems and issues, that they like to flex a little military muscle.
Sure.
Or, you know, Trump was not able to get this big healthcare agenda done, which
Right.
domestically was a big deal.
Because this has taken some of the focus away from the domestic
that they
politics.
turned
hasn't it?
overseas, and that wouldn't be the first president to do that.
No, you're absolutely right. And Daniel, so getting back to the issue at hand, Moscow obviously denouncing the missile strike. It's also demanding an international investigation. Is that a serious request? And what is Moscow trying to prove by demanding an investigation?
Well, what they're trying to say is that they feel that there are conclusions being made before there's been any real proof presented. We've seen a lot of the Russian state media not showing any of the videos or very little information about the civilian casualties that were reported very widely in Western media from the alleged chemical weapons attack from the Syrian government. So certainly they're wanting to see some independent people on the ground, at least that's what they're saying, to really look into what happened in terms of the gas that was released. From as far as Russia's concerned, they're saying that it was chemical weapons stored by Syrian rebels and that it was accidentally released by a Syrian airstrike. So that's been their position. But of course, you know, they haven't provided any real evidence of that either. So this call that we're seeing repeated over and over again for an independent investigation, whether or not the investigators can get there in time before, you know, there's evidence, you know, is either dissipated or disappeared, that's a big question.
And that seems to me like another distraction here, Cindy. But getting back into U.S. strategy, what is the ultimate strategy here on Syria? Has Secretary Tillerson expanded or explained what the U.S. strategy is regarding that region?
Well, we have heard different administration officials appear to contradict each other. Just a few days ago, Tillerson had said it would be up to the Syrian people to decide the fate of Assad, which is similar to what the Russians are saying. But then in recent days, when he went to Italy and when he went to Moscow, he was saying that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end.
So is that the goal now, is to remove Assad from power?
Well, that's a very good question, Mill, and I'm not even sure if the administration knows. I mean, they've said things that sort of tamper that a little bit, saying, well, he should go, but it should be an orderly process. So Lavrov is now saying that that Tillerson agreed that there would be no more strikes, but I don't think Tillerson agreed anything of the kind.
Right. Daniel, same question. How loyal do you think Russia is when it comes to keeping Assad in power in Syria?
Well, certainly for the time being, they're not wanting to see Assad removed from power. They want a stable government in charge that they can do deals with in Damascus. They want to keep their military bases there. This is, you know, Russia's big presence in the Middle East. It's big military presence in the Middle East. Their involvement in this conflict has also gotten the Kremlin back to the big table, involved in discussions in Geneva, in Astana, in Kazakhstan, able to talk to the U.S. again after such terrible relations over Russia's annexation of Crimea and its support for rebels in eastern Ukraine. So they certainly want to have at least somebody in charge in Damascus that they can deal with. Now, whether or not that's Assad is a big question. They've said from the very beginning that they are not, their support for Assad is not unlimited. But at the same time, they do want somebody who they can deal with. So it could be somebody from his family or a successor, but they want that to be a negotiated process that'll put somebody in power that they can certainly still have good relations with.
10 seconds, Cindy. Are we in the midst of a new Cold War?
I wouldn't put it quite that strongly.
Okay, but we shall see. Thank you for your reporting on this, Daniel and Cindy Sain. Time now for another quick break, but when we come back, humanitarian groups say time is running out as drought and conflict spreads famine and death in countries across parts of Africa. But first, a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.
And technology, here's what's new.
Have a seat, grab a book, and breathe pollution-free air while you relax from a filter system that could be fitted to benches, bus stops, even city walls. Dirty air goes in the back, clean air comes out around the user. The system is made by Air Labs, whose CEO is Sophie Power.
So we clean nitrogen dioxide, which is, as you know, one of the biggest problems in European cities, especially where we have many, many diesel vehicles.
Independent testing shows the Air Labs filter removes about 90% of city air pollutants, according to Air Labs co-founder Matthew Johnson.
The air pollution over a city like London could be kilometers thick. You can't clean all of that air, but if you focus on the places where people are, it's a much smaller volume of treated air that you need.
Over 12 million people died in 2012 as a result of an unhealthy environment, according to the World Health Organization. For VOA's What's New, I'm Martin Seacrest.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Millar Sega in Washington. Conflicts, crop failures, drought, and a host of other factors have brought possible famine to millions of Africans. Relief agencies estimate more people in Africa are now at risk of disease or death due to food insecurity than at any time since the Second World War. Several regions have been hit hard, but the famines are most pronounced in Nigeria, South Sudan, and Somalia. Now, for those at risk, time obviously in short supply. Now, for some perspective on the size and scope of this developing humanitarian crisis, we are joined in Washington by Salem Solomon, a respected journalist at VOA's Africa division, along with VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young, who's been laser focused on the underlying causes of this crisis. My thanks to both of you for joining us. We need a little bit of explanation, perhaps tell the world just the scope and the size of this problem. Salem, how large is this developing crisis? How many people are affected?
19 countries across the continent of Africa have been affected by this. 20 million people. We're talking about countries northeastern Nigeria. When we say Nigeria is affected by this, we have to be very careful about this because Nigeria is the most fertile country, but it's specific places like Adamawa, Yobe, and Borno State that are affected, and this is because conflict and, of course, lack of access to humanitarian, efforts on the ground. South Sudan, similar to that.
So I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit more on some of the human impact of the crisis that's developing there. But I want to get Jeffrey Young into this conversation. You've done some deep backgrounding on this whole issue, and you're saying aside from the natural causes, this is a problem that's been made worse by a lot of the underlying political and ethnic factors that seem to affect some of these countries. Can you explain that to our viewers?
Governmental, political, and ethnic factors. And we can look at it country by country. You look at South Sudan, you have basically a fight to the death between Riek Machar, who is a Nuer, and Salva Kiir, the president, who is a Dinka. And each side has a faction, and the two factions are literally fighting for total control of South Sudan and its riches.
And what is this doing to the people?
They're caught in the middle. As this conflict is going back and forth, you have people starving in the middle, people who cannot be accessed because of conflict or because of remoteness, because of a number of factors. You have a situation where it has been very difficult for NGOs, for aid agencies to get into the country. Sometimes they've been allowed in, other times, in South Sudan's instance, they have actually imposed prohibitive fees for NGOs to enter the country as a way of trying to dissuade them. And the big factor is that Salva Kiir and his faction is definitely, according to many qualified sources, using food as a weapon.
And Salim, I'm wondering if you agree with Jeffrey's take on this. Are some of the causes largely man-made?
Yes, definitely, especially in South Sudan, as Jeffrey just explained. South Sudan right now is the country that famine has been declared there. Another thing on the humanitarian impact that you mentioned earlier, another thing to focus is second, third countries that are around it. For instance, Uganda is now accepting or allowing South Sudanese refugees to come in. It's playing host to 800,000 refugees coming in. The most vulnerable people are affected here, children being force-fed, women giving birth in IDP camps, internally displaced people in camps that have no assistance of any sort.
And I think when I look at some of these pictures, Salim, most heartbreaking is the fact that nearly half of the victims are children under the age of 5.
That's right. I mean, most of the time, in times of conflict, the most vulnerable are affected. Same in Somalia. Our correspondent from the Somali service just came back this week. He has witnessed an 80-year-old man crying, breaking down. You see the level of desperation. Women giving birth in these places. We're talking about 6.2 million people, half of the population affected by this. So this is very severe. It's on the verge of famine. It's very important to specify the difference between famine and drought, because by the time a country declares famine, it means that you have to help. There's no way out of it.
And Jeffrey, you saw the wall-to-wall coverage when those Syrian children were killed by the chemical weapons attack in Syria. Shouldn't this issue be getting wall-to-wall coverage as well? Shouldn't this be leading the newscast?
The human tragedy is immense. The thing of it is, in order for the story to get out, people have to be able to get in. Many of these are very difficult, almost non-permissive environments. When you're dealing with Somalia, Al-Shabaab creates a non-permissive environment. In other words, news crews can't really roam around freely in Somalia and file stories to show you how bad things are. Northeastern Nigeria, in Borno, in the areas around that, Boko Haram, you're not going to be able to get a press pass and walk in and cover this story, because you're dealing with, as they say in the military, non-permissive environments. And this is one of the reasons why this is not able to be brought to the public's attention as much as Syria, where, yes, you do have a conflict zone, but people are filing stories.
So, Len, you've been trying to get this story out there to more people. Tell me about the efforts that you and others are trying to do to get the message out there that these people need help.
You know, our role as a journalist is of course to convey the message and desperation that people are dealing with on the ground. Some of the footages that we've been sharing and showing have gotten some sort of response. The role of the diaspora, I mean, the African diaspora, is very important. In 2011, 260,000 people died in Somalia. But, you know, that also brings remittance issues in Somalia.
I'm quickly running out of time, but Jeffrey, 10 seconds. Is there any reason for hope?
There's a reason for hope when you have good governance, when you have external agencies like the African Union that stand up and take a position and hold to it.
Thank you so much to both of you, Jeffrey and Salim, and to all of our correspondents. That is our show for today. We'll be back next week for another edition of the Correspondents. In the meantime, do stay up to date with the latest news from around the world at voanews.com. You can also catch up on all of our shows there. Click on the Watch tab on the upper right of the VOA website. We're also on Facebook and YouTube at VOA The Correspondents. Thanks for watching. I'm Millar Sega, and for now, so long from Washington. Thank you both. That was a very...